Greetings, travellers, and welcome to episode 54 of the Innsmouth Book Club podcast. Yeah, we're taking shelter in the library today because it's a absolutely horrific day out there. It's lashing it down, and it's still close to Halloween, so it's still a bit terrifying in Innsmouth. I'm one of your hosts, Tim Mendes,
and I'm the other one, Rob Hoyton. Yeah, so as we've said, it's pretty much Halloween all year round, isn't it? Let's be honest, in Innsmouth.
Pretty much, yeah.
It's just a little bit more Halloween-y around Halloween.
Yeah. Well, I noticed last night the Yig lot were out, you know, doing the old snake dances because the Day of the Dead, you know, and all that. So.
Yes, and I'm still seeing those things hanging up on the telegraph poles there that we don't like to look at too closely.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Are they like scarecrows? Are they supposed to? I know.
I'm pretty sure one of them was Zadok Allen.
Poor old Zadok.
Yeah, he does cop it, doesn't he?
So, yes, do come in, make yourselves at home. We've got a nice fire going. We're going to be looking at a book today, or a story that I've never heard before. In fact, I didn't know this author before. So it's always interesting to find new authors. I say new authors, this is really from Edwardian time, isn't it? Or
yeah,
sort of
1929.
Yeah, and I thought I was up on my James and my Onions and my Bensons and everything, but yeah, this was a nice new discovery for me. Before we get into that, we just got one or two things we want to mention. The first is a correction. I think we were talking last time when we covered The Worms of the Earth by Robert E. Howard, and we mentioned Richard Tierney, whose Heroes It's Simon is kind of contemporaneous with Bran, or around that same time. And I was speculating in particular perhaps there was some connection between Howard and Tierney, some influence backwards and forwards. And of course, a couple of people kindly pointed out that Richard Tierney was born about the same time that Robert E. Howard died.
Right.
So the chance of any direct connection was extremely unlikely. I must have got a bit confused there. Maybe I was thinking of Derleth or something who Tierney was corresponding with later on, perhaps.
Well, he was, yeah. Mate, yeah, it's hard to keep a track on some of who was around at the same time, because people drifted in and drifted out. And, and you've got the sort of central characters were sort of, I guess, Smith and Derleth, really. And everybody else sort of spun off around it, you know.
So there we go. Apologies for that little mix-up. And now, speaking of sword and sorcery, we just want to briefly mention as well that the new Innsmouth Gold anthology, Feast of Fools, is due out any day now. That's 11 new sword and sorcery stories from the Innsmouth Writing Circle. And I have to say with this one, not only are the stories really good, there's some great stuff in there. We've got fantastic artwork on this as well.
Yeah.
From Graveheart Designs. It is spectacular. So we're looking forward to getting that one out. And we'll possibly be doing some sort of launch party for it. We may do like a YouTube launch party, I think, in the very near future.
Excellent, yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I just wanted to mention one more sort of traditional cosmic horror. Strange Eon 2022 has just been released. It features 13 stories, all inspired by Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard and Clark Ashton Smith. I'm in there, Miguel Flageur's in there, M. Stern. It's 13 authors in total, and my story is Transmissions from Vormithadreth.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so you can see the Smith influence. I went with the Smith on that. So,
Excellent. It is this, obviously we've been covering Smith stories on Strange Shadows, our sister podcast, and it's difficult not to let some of that rich language seep into your work, isn't it? I think we've got a bit of a competition going between us as to who can get the most Smithian words in their stories.
Definitely. Especially in the Doggerland anthology, which is coming out at the end of the month. We both really went for the Smith in that one.
Yes, Toad Gods, the lot.
Yeah. We've got Toad Gods, we've got words of like 8 syllables.
Just don't ask us to pronounce them.
Yes, please.
Okay, so let's browse along the bookshelves here and pick out our book. So we're reading this from The Thrill of Horror, which was a Hugh Lamb anthology in 1975. And I remember from that time, in fact, I've still got some on the shelves, I'm sure. He did a lot of these collections, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Lamb.
Yeah.
There's some really great stuff there. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting about the author we're covering today, Eleanor Scott. We'll get into more about who she is in just a minute. But she released one collection of horror stories, Randall's Round. The title story of which is what we're covering, which has just been re-released by British Library Tales of the Weird, and it's the first time that it's actually been in print for a long old time. So it kind of went, it kind of went out and then just kind of disappeared for a while. But Lamb was one of the few people of that sort of era who remembered Eleanor Scott and pretty much strip-mined that anthology, that collection, because all of them books that he put out have got one or two of her stories. So all of the stories in Randall's Round were published in those anthologies of Hugh Lamb's. Yeah. And
I have to say, even looking through this collection, there's some quite obscure names in there, isn't it? It's
yeah.
We should maybe do a special sometimes on people like Hugh Lamb and Peter Haining.
Yes.
Because they really kept a lot of this stuff alive, didn't they?
Yeah. It's like things like E. Nesbitt's Man-Sized in Marble is another one I'd like to cover at some point of that this same sort of thing. Because how I discovered Eleanor Scott, specifically this story, was Handheld Press were at a convention that I was at. They had a stall there, and they brought out a series of British weird fiction. So there was British Weird, Women's Weird, and Women's Weird 2. And it was in Women's Weird, which is a superb collection. It's got Man-Sized in Marble in there and all these other things. And I can't remember the name of the Villa and the Vortex and all that kind of stuff. Some really great stories in there. But the one that really stood out for me was this, because I'd never read it before. But now it's kind of being heralded as one of the earliest examples of folk horror.
Yeah.
And an incredibly influential story. I mean, along with Machen, it's the sort of the origins of folk horror. So because folk horror is having a bit of a revival nowadays, this is finally getting some recognition.
So Eleanor Scott was born Helen Lees in 1892 in Middlesex, and she lived until 1965. She was the daughter of a barrister and a novelist and was taught largely by her mother, and later attended Oxford, and following the First World War she became a teacher. I think she ended up teaching in Oxford, actually.
Yeah, she did, yeah.
So her first published story was The Room in October 1923. That was in the Cornhill magazine. And in 1928 she published a novel called War Among the Ladies. That was published under her own name, H.M. Lees. And it caused some controversy at the time. It was a sort of quite a scathing social commentary on the predicament of single working women. I guess at that time you're looking at the rise of the suffragettes, and I guess it's maybe because of that controversy she started publishing under Eleanor Scott, did you say?
Yes, basically by all accounts, after that she started publishing under Eleanor Scott and never used her real name again. I guess to try and distance herself from that controversy, I guess.
Yeah. And there is some speculation that she also wrote 2 mystery novels under the name Peter Radcliffe Shaw as well.
Yeah.
So again, not an uncommon thing in that era for women to pretend to be men to publish novels and stories.
Yeah.
Or at least make it ambiguous sometimes.
Indeed, yeah. But she also published another 2 horror stories outside, because the only horror she really did was The Room and the Randall's Round collection as Eleanor Scott. But then later she published 2 more horror stories under the name N. Dennett.
Ah, right.
And they were folk horror as well. So.
Right. And the story we're looking at today, Randall's Round, that came out in 1929, and it's actually the title of a collection of ghost stories that she put out that she says in the preface or introduction were inspired by dreams.
Indeed.
Which is it's a nice touch, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a shame when Randall's Round was published in 1929, it didn't sell very well, and a lot of that is put down to the cover.
Oh, right.
Because the cover art, because while they did have like some children dancing on the front of it. It was done in such a way that made it look like a bucolic children's novel.
Ah, right, okay.
So yeah, it's like we've discussed before, haven't we? The importance of the cover.
Yes, we both have some personal experience of covers gone wrong, don't we?
Yes, we do indeed. We do indeed.
So, as I say, we're reading this in the Thrill of Horror, the Hugh Lamb collection, and there's a little preface of this to the story that talks about the tradition in Padstow in Cornwall of the hobby horse, or the obby horse, as it should more right.
Obby horse. Yeah.
So I think it's interesting just to look at this briefly, because it does kind of set up the background to the story, and then we'll see some obvious parallels with the Wicker Man, of course, later on we'll talk about.
Oh, yeah.
But this is basically the May Day festival, where two processions go around the town, each with this obby horse, which is a kind of a sort of horse's head on a stick with snapping jaws.
Yep.
If you look online at pictures of it, it is quite an odd-looking thing.
It's terrifying, is what it is.
Yeah. And this is preceded by someone called the Teaser, and there's various costumes and this kind of thing involved. Now, obviously, people now think of this as some really old pagan ritual. It's a pre-Christian festival, but the earliest reference to it is actually 1803. And there's very little evidence of anything exactly like that beforehand, though of course we've got May Day festivals going back to the sort of 15th, 16th century, you know.
Yeah.
So that is certainly an old tradition. And it really came into prominence in 1907 when the folklorist Thurston Peters wrote about it, and it was him who sort of first floated this idea of pagan fertility rites and everything, which immediately created a huge tourist boom.
Yes, of course it did.
Padstow.
Everybody down on the Great Western.
To see the pagan fertility rites, those naughty pagans.
Yeah.
And and it still is a big tourist attraction today, of course.
Yeah, so we'll get into the story now, I guess. We start off because Scott cites M.R. James, E.F. Benson, and Walter de la Mare as influences. And it starts off in the grand tradition of M.R. James with a couple of men in tweed bickering about academic subjects.
Yeah, and I love this idea of this half contempt that we have between science and art.
Yes.
And it sounds like, again, we've got the rational scientist decrying the artistic, or the folklore, in this case, the old traditions.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because our protagonist is a man called Hayling, who's an Oxford undergrad. And his companion, a man called Mortlake, who I love that name. It's a great name. He studies folk traditions and customs. And it's like you said, the disdain. He describes it as complete rot. Complete rot.
Yeah. And there was another thing I like here, was this reference to Boney, who I presume might be his tutor or something like that. He said, Boney's worried about my health. Apparently the weather is particularly close and clammy in Oxford at the time. And Boney's advised him to take a few days off, go out into the countryside to restore his health. And there's a bit of pipe puffing as well.
Oh, there is. Yeah, there's a bit of pipe puffing, and you can just see the sumptuous decor, can't you? Maybe they've got a glass of brandy, a little snifter of brandy going on.
Oh, a little snifter, I'm sure. Yeah. So it is very M.R. James at this stage.
Yeah, very much so. And yeah, they're talking. Mortlake is saying that all the revivals are pretty much artificial, and it's here that you get a little dig at the mummers of Hadlington Quarry near Oxford, who Eleanor Scott has described as being sanitised and picturesque.
Wow. Yes, we don't wish to offend any Morris dancers who might be listening out there, or any mummers, because again, these things are quite widespread.
Indeed.
Across the whole country.
But it's interesting because you do get the ones where it is just like, it's a bunch of middle-aged people who put on some bells, dance around, and it's all very nice. But then you get the real guys.
Yeah.
And it is vicious as all hell. I've seen that's actually in Gloucestershire. I've seen some Morris dancers, and the ones who, with the black face and
and
all
the
that.
coal on the soot.
Yeah, the coal, the soot, and all that.
Yeah.
And because the singer of Incubus Succubus, Candia McCormack, does it. Is involved in one of the groups, and I've seen they just wallop the crap out of each other with sticks.
Wow.
You wouldn't want to get your fingers in the way, I'm telling you. You'd lose them.
Never play the piano again.
Yeah, no. Well, Mortlake goes on to basically defend his position on this, because he's saying it's not about those revivalists. It's about the real deal.
Yeah.
He's interested in the real deal. He's trying to find these... He says here that there are certainly some very odd things done in out-of-the-way places. And that's his sort of interest, is finding these lost or traditions that will be lost, and documenting them. All these old customs and strange things like this. And Hailing, obviously, again, he's being dismissive. And you can't really think that there's any kind of heathen cult still practiced in this country. And Mortlake replies that while there isn't that many left, I think there is, not in England anyway, but there will be in France and Wales.
It's almost like the implication they're sort of perhaps slightly less civilized sort of places, isn't it?
Yeah. But I thought that was an interesting thing, because most people who have looked into Scott's writing have cited Arthur Machen as an influence. And obviously he was the Welsh wizard, and his was all about strange rites in Wales. So I wonder if that was a nice little nod to Mr. Machen there.
Yeah. And having said that, when you look at the hobby horse thing, there are some parallel sort of festivals in France, and I think in Galicia, in Spain as well. So again, if we go back to the roots of these things, they were probably more general than local, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I guess they become local for local people as they die out. The kind of their sphere of influence diminishes. But who knows? These might have been common practices at one time across the societies.
Yeah.
Well, we get into the Paleolithic a bit later on, don't we? So
yes,
I guess how far back do you want to take these things in that sense?
Yeah, this is it. But and this is where our protagonist is saying that he's been told to take some time off, so he's going down to the Cotswolds to spend a nice weekend relaxing in the fresh air, and he's going to a little village called Randall's. Randall's,
yes. I couldn't find any trace of this as a real place.
No.
So I'm presuming it's fictitious, but maybe based on... They usually based it on somewhere they'd been, didn't they?
Yes, it's believed to be based on Chalford Hill in the Cotswolds, which had a Randall's Hill.
Ah, right.
Just outside it, which was a tumuli.
Oh, well, that fits perfectly then, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I didn't know that. The only thing that amused me that I did find was a place called Randall's Candles, which I thought 10 out of 10 for the name. Isn't that great? I'm going to put a link up to Randall's Candles. I think they deserve some custom just for the name.
The Randall's Candles, I love it. Now I've got the two Ronnies in my head, the four candles sketch. Four candles.
So yes, off he trots to the Cotswolds, and we get this. It's a little bit like we've been talking about Smith as well. We get this nice description of the bucolic scene, the wonderful English countryside, before it all goes wrong, don't we?
Oh yeah.
And we get a mention of the Guildhall as well, which I believe Mortlake mentioned to him. Oh, if you get a chance, look at the Guildhall.
Yeah, because basically Mortlake says that Randall's is believed to be one of the places where there is a genuine survival of these folk traditions. They have a game or a dance called Randall's Round. And I'd very much like to know if there are any written records, anything definite, So, yeah, so Hailing says, yeah, all right, I may as well while I'm there. But, off he trots. And like you say, you do get some lovely descriptions, don't you? of that, the softness of the air, pleasant lines of the bare sloping fields, the quiet of the low rolling clouds. It is, like you say, very bucolic, isn't it?
And the Cotswolds, even today, is very chocolate boxy. A lot of the villages.
Oh, it is.
It? It's
yeah.
A hugely expensive place to live, I think. It's, but yeah, very picturesque. Yeah.
It's a beautiful place, but it's not just expensive to live, it's expensive to visit. I went there a couple of years ago, and it's, oh man, people talk about London prices in pubs. Cotswolds prices are a thing to behold. Yeah.
Did you go into the Flaming Hand Inn by any chance?
No, I didn't. I love that name. I love that name, the Flaming Hand. Yeah, because he gets there, and it's just a small little village with like a market square with a few houses round it, and there's the Guildhall and a pub.
Yeah.
And I saw the name, and I had to look it up to see if there was a tradition of Flaming Hand, and I couldn't find anything. I went so far as a book I bought at a convention by Arthur Chappell about pub signs.
Oh yeah.
In speculative fiction. So you've got loads of famous ones and things like that. It's a really good book, and there's nothing in there. So yeah, it's just obviously something she just came up with.
The only thing it put me in mind of was the Hand of Glory. You know, the hanged. Was it from a hanged man? They take the hand and they put candles into it.
Yeah.
Was that for divination or something like that? I'm not sure of the purpose now, but that's kind of what it put me in mind of. So perhaps a link to some sort of old, slightly occult practice or something like that.
Yeah, that was basically the thing that sprung to my mind is obviously some occult reference, isn't it?
Well, the only other thing that's just occurred to me is perhaps the hand is a field hand. You know, perhaps there was some sort of accident with a bonfire or conflagration or something, and this poor guy was running around on fire. Maybe that's where the name comes from.
Or you've got the northern use of the term flaming, which is basically like an expletive. You know,
it's that flaming hand again.
Flaming hand, a flaming hand again. Drop pickmuck all over the street. You know.
If anyone out there does know of a pub called the Flaming Hand, do let us know. I'd be fascinated to find out the background behind that story, because they all have a story behind them generally, don't they? The old pub names anyway.
Yeah, that's why I went down this pub thing rabbit hole this morning, because I was like, oh, there's got to be a story to it. It's quite disappointing that there isn't. Yeah, but that's where old Hayling is staying, and he thinks it's going to be quite a good place to look up the town records, because the Guildhall's just over the road. And he receives a hearty welcome at the inn, which is strange in these stories, because usually you expect, the innkeeper to be a bit surly or a bit American Werewolf in London.
Yeah, but it does turn a little bit like that later on, doesn't it, I guess?
Oh, it does. But to begin with, you get this, because again, it's all like a really quite idyllic scene, isn't it? It's a lovely day and...
Isn't that typical thing again? It's a nice sunny day, everything really nice, nothing could possibly go wrong. Yeah. And then degree by degree we get the layers of weirdness coming rolling in like mist.
Yes.
On the downs.
Yeah, well Hayling's been given the run of 2 rooms, because it's quite an out of the way place. They don't get much in the way of visitors. And he's on the ground floor overlooking the square. And again, you get some great descriptions here of the inn yard, a pleasant cobbled place surrounded by a moss-grown wall and barns with beautiful lichened roofs. Yeah. And
so it's like old, but it's not decrepit.
No.
It's the impression you get. It's maintained. It's got an air of antiquity about it, but it's a functional living place kind of thing.
But isn't that the Cotswolds all over? It is very... there's a lot of history there, but it's all very, very well manicured. Yeah, it's not like some of these little out-of-the-way villages like up in Yorkshire and things, where it's all like weeds poking out of the walls and...
Yeah. It is immaculate, isn't it? Yeah, so you wonder in some ways it's almost like a theme park kind of setup.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? You get bits of Shropshire is like that as well for some reason.
Right. It's all different from the Fens. That's all.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's all sinking, isn't it? It's all nearly in a swamp. Well, Hailing, basically, he's having a great old time. So he sits down in his furnished sitting room and lights his pipe. I like that, you know. He's there in his tweed with his pipe going.
There you go.
And prepared himself to spend a lazy evening. And as he's settling down, he's reading a book, and he starts hearing some children's voices chanting outside.
Never a good sign.
No, but he reflected that Guy Fawkes' Day wasn't due yet. And in any case, the tune they sang was not the formless huddle usually produced on that august occasion. This was a real melody, rather an odd, plaintive air, ending with an abrupt drop that pleased his ear.
Oh,
Yeah.
pleased his ear.
Yeah, so she's got a lovely turn of phrase, I find. And, yeah, but little as he knew of folklore, and as much as he despised it, Hailing could not but recognise that this was a genuine folk air, and a very attractive one. So, yeah, well, these kiddies, they're out in the square, they're doing a little ritualistic dance song thing, and then they just go.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it, they're not begging. It's just a tradition.
It kind of put me in mind, and again, the obvious thing here is like the sort of Ring a Roses, which, as we know, is about the plague.
Yeah.
And we all fall down dead, you know, that kind of thing. And I can't think of many circumstances where the sound of children singing like that is anything but quite spooky.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's like Nightmare on Elm Street, isn't it? With the skipping rhyme. You know, the 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. That's what this sort of brings to my mind. It's that kind of plaintive, you know, it's a similar thing, isn't it?
And yeah, if you've ever, you know, at one time I lived fairly near to a school where, in fact, it was just over the road, and playtime was always quite a pleasant sound. You hear the kids playing and that sort of sound. But when it becomes that unified singing or chanting, I don't know, it seems to take on a slightly sinister air of some.
Oh, mate. Because I'm in a high-rise block, and down in the courtyard, there's a little children's park, and it's a day nursery, it's a creche thing down there, right? And one day I was blazingly hungover for some reason, and I was lying in the bath, and it was the middle.
You got pissed.
Yeah, all right. And I had the windows wide open because it was the middle of summer and it was sweltering hot, and there was like 3 or 4 kids, and they were all singing the Thomas the Tank Engine theme music, right? But they were all slightly out of time with each other. It was like being in hell. It was horrible. It was just like, oh, this is creepy.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very evocative, and the way she's written this, it's very vivid again, isn't it?
Yeah. Again, it's that sort of literature of that time. It is very, very visual. And the words, the phrases she used. And but as soon as these kiddies have gone, they're replaced by some guy on a flute or flageolet playing the same tune.
Yeah. And I almost thought now it's like we're almost switching into Lovecraft, aren't we? You know?
Yeah, the demonic piping. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think here we've got elements of James Machen and Lovecraft in many ways. Whether they're intentional or not, it's very, very much the territory of all three in some respects.
Yeah, because, I mean, yeah, there's obvious Arthur Machen influences, and I think by proxy there's almost a bit of the Dunwich horror in this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, even some like Innsmouth in terms of the strangeness that we'll see in a bit.
Yes.
You know. Yeah, and then after this piping, he starts hearing people gathering in the square. It's like the whole population of the village has turned out. So he gets up and he goes out the window, and they're performing this rite, this Randall's Round, which is very strange. This description of it here. At one end of this space stood a man playing on a long and curiously sweet pipe. He played the same haunting melody again and again. In the very centre stood a pole, as a maypole stands in some villages, but instead of garlands and ribbons, this pole had flung over it the shaggy hide of some creature like an ox. I mean, that's the again. You can see with that hobby horse thing. It's just sinister, isn't it? It's just like, okay, there's a dead animal skin blowing about in the breeze.
And this is where you start getting sort of Royston Vasey vibes as well, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah, definitely. And it's described as having a heavy head with short, thick horns. And then, without a word or a signal, men came out from among the watchers and began a curious dance. Now, if anybody's ever been to I've played folk festivals. When I was in a pirate folk band thing, right, Dirty Sea Shanties, I've played Sidmouth Folk Week, and I've ended up drunk at the Cayleys. They have in these big tents. It's sort of some of the most bizarre stuff. It's like, where did you even learn the steps to these things? It's almost Masonic, the like one arm under your leg.
So it's not like you're kind of line dancing then 3 steps to the right kick, that sort of stuff.
No. Well, that's something she differentiates here. She makes a point of saying that that Hayling had seen folk dancing done in Oxford, and he recognised some of the features of the dance, but is struck of being a graver, more barbaric affair than the performances he'd seen before. And that's it all over.
Yeah.
It's not like the ones you see in a little village hall. It's all, like you say, the line dancing, heel, toe, yeah. Skip, skip, skip. It's nothing like that. Because most of these are like big drunken men with big bushy rosebush beards throwing their wives around. It's mental.
This is the stuff that predates that, and the versions you see are like the bowdlerized versions, that, like we said before, the tourist versions, if you like, almost. Yeah, this is the real deal now.
Yeah. So they took hands in a ring facing outwards, then with their hands lifted, began to move slowly round counterclockwise. And I love this. There's a lovely little bit here that she mentions that memory stirred faintly, and 2 things came drifting into Hayling's mind. One, the sound of Mortlake's voice as the 2 men had stood watching a performance of the Headington Mummers. There they are. That's the black ring. It's supposed to be symbolic of death. A survival of a time when a dead victim lay in the middle and the dancers turned away from him. And the other thing he remembers is that basically moving in a counterclockwise fashion is considered unlucky, and mentions the Scottish term widdershins.
Widdershins, it's a lovely word, isn't it? Yeah.
I love it. I love the word. That's one I do try and get in my stories as much as possible. Yeah. Widdershins.
It's just loaded with a sort of atmosphere, isn't it? That word. And wasn't it the case if you went widdershins around the church 3 times, you summed up the devil, or a lot of those kind of things? Yeah,
there's a place here called Chantry Ring, which is where Crowley and his lot used to hang out when they were down here. And it said if you do widdershins around that 7 times, the devil will appear and offer you a bowl of soup in exchange for your soul.
That's not much of a deal, is it?
Well, that's what I said when I read about it. I was like, maybe if it was a sirloin steak and a decent bottle of wine or something, he might have a deal. But a bowl of soup, come on!
I can get pack of soup for 50p in
exactly. You want something a bit special, wouldn't you? A plate of oysters or something. I was
thinking more like a big diamond or some bars of gold or something. At least.
Yeah. No, apparently it's a bowl of soup. Yeah.
Wow, times must have been hard, eh?
Yeah, this is it, isn't it? And so as he's watching, 2 new figures advance. One, a man whose head was covered by a mask made in the rough likeness of a bull. That's just disturbing already. The other, shrouded from head to foot in a white sheet, so that even the sex of the figure was indistinguishable. So they go into the centre of this circle, and the bull-headed man placed the second figure with his back to the pole, where the hide was hanging above it. And as the dancers started to move more and more slowly, the bull-headed man jerked the pole so the shaggy hide falls down and engulfs this figure in white.
Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
It's... it says here, as if the creature hanging limp on the pole had suddenly come to life and with one swift, terrible movement had engulfed and devoured the helpless victim standing passively before it.
Yes, which is a nice bit of foreshadowing, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
As we find out. And I was thinking here with the bull's head, like, Crete and the Minotaur and those kind of myths.
It does give that
Sort of feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. The first thing that sprung to my mind, because my brain is warped by 70s Doctor Who, was the episode The Horns of Naimon, and they are sort of Minotaur figures, right? But Minotaurs from space, basically. But the costume is awful. It is basically like a paper mache bull's head with these really pointy horns on the top of it, with glowing red eyes. And that's what I have in my head when I read that. Yeah.
But this goes back to something. Well, perhaps we'll mention that when we get into the Paleolithic part. But yeah, we'll talk about that then. People wearing animal masks.
Yeah, well, it's become a major trope in folk horror in general, hasn't it? That whole, especially in the revival stuff, they've all got the antlers and the heads now, haven't they?
Yeah, but even if we think of Venetian masks and that kind of thing, it seems that quite often these masks will be in the shape of animals or some sort of grotesque creature, almost like a gargoyle type thing or something. So it seems that the masks go beyond just hiding the identity of the person and into almost transforming them into something else.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. Anyway, this left Hailing quite shaken, and it startled him, and he thought as if he should do something. It sort of triggered his fight or flight. So he threw open the window as if he was going to jump out and stop it, but then he stops himself. And sort of pull yourself together, man, because as soon as this is done, everybody just gets up and just goes. That's it. No fanfare, nothing.
That's quite a strange thing, isn't it? That makes it even more eerie, that you've got this quite unusual event and then it's just over. And I thought it was interesting, despite all his, this is a load of rot and all his rationalism, when he sees this as just watching it has this effect on him. Yeah. Quite a primal effect on it.
Yeah, well, I actually see this protagonist, while he has the sort of Jamesian background, he is quite similar to some of Lovecraft's protagonists, especially as we'll see later in his response to what happens. He is almost like one of those that is kind of, gets attacking nerves because of what's going on around him. Kind of thing.
And I suppose, to be fair, it was mentioned early on that he was suffering with his nerves a bit.
Indeed, yes.
In the parlance of the time, he might have been in a bit of a funk.
Yes. Yeah, so he settles himself down anyway, and he rummages in his rucksack and gets out the book that Mortlake had lent him. A volume of a very famous book on folklore. And it was lots of accounts of village games and feasts and all this stuff. But it was all traced in a very sober and scholarly fashion. And he actually gets to a part about Randall's and about the Randall's Round. So it's the origin of this dance is almost certainly sacrificial. Near Randall's is one of those banks or mounds surrounded by a thicket, which the villagers refuse to approach. These mounds are not uncommon in the Cotswolds, though few seem to be regarded with quite as much awe as Randall's Bank, which the country people avoided scrupulously. It's oval in shape and is certainly formed by a long barrow of the Paleolithic age. And the theory is borne out by the fact that at one time the curious Randall's Round was danced about the mound, the victim being led into the fringe of the thicket that surrounds it. And there you go, and given to something.
Something, yes. Yeah. So the Paleolithic is basically the Stone Age, which ended about 10,000 BC, which incidentally was about the age of Cheddar Man, who we spoke about last time in Worms of the Earth. So there's
Cheddy.
There's a nice little sort of link there. And I think, as we've already mentioned, the animal head thing, in a lot of the cave paintings from that time, you see that almost like these rituals to bring success in hunting, perhaps.
Yes.
I mean, we've got no way of knowing what they were about, but that seems to be an idea of what was going on. Though in this case, it's it seems to be summoning something else, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. And this is what you get it almost goes into sort of Lovecraftian territory, doesn't it? Because it is more, I guess it's the Maccan influence again, isn't it? It's because he's already mentioned survivals and things like this, so it's things that were there before us.
Yes,
which is a common thing throughout Maccan's work and Lovecraft's and all the rest of it. So this is part of that tradition. But I love this. Haling's just read this, and instead of going, that's a bit weird, he goes, that's amusing. Jove, what a lark it would be to get into that barrow. He went on, drawing on his pipe. This is the ultimate man in tweed, isn't it?
Jove, what a lark. Yeah, what a lark to get into an old barrow. And I'm thinking, no, it's not a lark at all. Have you never read any of these stories?
He's obviously never read Warning to the Curious, has he?
Well, didn't we even get a line later on about don't go digging round here, which is, again, And I think he even said something about kings. So, yeah. Yeah, I wonder if that was a little nod back there.
Yeah, probably. Well, she acknowledged that James was a big influence. James and Benson.
Nice little Easter egg.
Yeah. Well, again, it's what we talked about before with all the Lovecraftian authors putting bits from their own stories, and I mean, I've put Easter eggs and nods.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, it's all part of the fun of writing and reading these stories. Of
course it is.
And then this I thought was the Lovecraft bit as well, where he gets into doing his research now at the Guildhall, where there's a little local library and there's town records and all that kind of stuff. So this is the research part of the adventure now.
Indeed, yeah. And he basically goes in there, and it's described as very cool and dark inside the Guildhall. So you've got that shift already, haven't you?
Yeah.
You've got that shift from the really nice, bright sunshine to, it's going a bit sinister now. They've got a small reference library, and he gets the town clerk to get out anything he can find, and his eye catches a book, Prehistoric Remains in the Cotswolds. Yeah. So he's really running with this idea of trying to get into this barrow, because he's said to himself, because he read in the Book of Mortlakes that villagers have never opened it. Nobody's ever opened it. And it's forbidden to touch it, kind of thing. And he's like, oh, well, we're living more enlightened times now. I'm sure I can persuade them to let me dig in their barrow.
And I suppose, actually, this was just before Sutton Hoo and all that, wasn't it?
Yeah. I
mean, we're in that kind of era, aren't we, where guys in tweed and ladies in pith helmets are going around digging a lot.
They all had. They must have bought a bulk lot of trowels and spades and stuff.
But I think Sutton Hoo was that during the war or around Second World War time? I think
it was around that time, wasn't it? Yeah.
And of course, Scott was interested in archaeology as well, right?
Indeed, yes. Was one of her fields of study was archaeology, and archaeology crops up in a number of her stories. In fact, more so in some of the other ones. You get some real, like when we discussed Caitlin Kiernan, and you got their real attention to detail with all this stuff about dinosaur bones.
Yeah,
you get the same in Scott's archaeological stuff. You can tell that she knows what she's on about.
Well, that's nice. That lends it some substance, I think, doesn't it, when you see that? Yeah.
Well, it's like James. I mean, because he was an antiquary, wasn't he? So it's
I guess maybe that's why a lot of the James stuff revolves around. Yes, you got some artifacts, but there's a lot of texts as well, isn't there?
Yes.
A lot of books.
Yeah, lots of dusty old tomes in hidden away libraries.
Yeah.
But you get this in here now, because he's been reading about barrows, but he finds in the town records a lawsuit from the early 17th century which concerned somebody brought charges of witchcraft against divers persons of the town.
Diverse persons.
Yeah.
And there was a lovely phrase here about abominable practicings.
Indeed, abominable practicings.
Yeah. That's not easy to say.
No, it's another great band name, though, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, devil worship.
Yeah. But the guy who brought the charges had reason for alarm because his son I love this description here. A young and comely lad of 20 years. I've never heard of a bloke being described as comely before.
No.
It's usually more you find it in like Pride and Prejudice, don't you?
Yes.
Things like that to describe the Bennett sisters.
A lass or something,
Yeah. But apparently he's just vanished without a trace. And he said that his son, it's hard to read because it's actually been done in like Middle English or something. His son Francis had been led away by warlocks in the dance. So yeah, basically he's been led off. And the date that this young comely lad had been led off was on that very day, the 31st of October.
Yes, which was, as we are here today in Innsmouth, was yesterday. Funnily enough. Probably lucky we weren't here yesterday then.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, so that it makes him think. But then he finds another document of a later date talking about the sale of the field and all the rest of it. But then there's one more that was of interest to Hayling from the 17th century, where the authorities of the Commonwealth inveighed against the lewd games and dancing, which are service to Satan and most strong abomination to the Lord. So they spoke openly of devil worship and loathly See, again, I'm doing it phonetically there. Loathly ceremonies at the bank in the field. So he's learning more and more about this barrow being, a centre of this Randall's Round thing,
And is this the one that led to the trial?
Yes.
We have this 1659 trial, and there's a lovely phrase here. Convicti et combusti, convicted and burned.
Yeah.
Which is concise but precise and rather grim.
Yeah. I love Hayling's response to this. Good Lord, burnt! Exclaimed Hayling aloud. What an appalling business. I suppose the poor beggars were only doing much the same thing as those chaps I saw yesterday.
Which makes you wonder how much of history of this kind of thing he knows about, because, I don't know what was taught in those days about the witch trials and Matthew Hopkins and those people.
Yeah. Pendle witches and all that.
Yeah, although most of the time I believe they were hung rather than burned, or hung and then burned, perhaps.
Yeah.
But, even so, I find that a little surprising that he's surprised about that. But it's nice that he's outraged about it,
Yeah, exactly. So... yeah, he's sitting and thinking about what it all meant, and he's like, did that queer business with the hide mean, well, some real devilry? Pictures floated into his mind, odd squat little men, broad of shoulder and long of arm, naked and hairy, dancing in solemn ghastly worship dim ages ago. I love that.
Nice. And again, this kind of almost harkens back to Worms of the Earth, right? The way the Picts are described in that.
Indeed.
And we think back to our Cheddar Man and everything else. It's now, whether that's a stereotypical view of how people were then, I don't really know. I know they say in medieval times people were a lot shorter and that kind of thing. But how many Stone Age skeletons do we have that we can ascertain what they look like? But it's almost that belief, and again, I guess especially from the Victorian era, the further we go back, the more primitive we must have been.
Yes. And
that primitive is reflected in how people look. If people are more hairy, then they're obviously primitive of mind as well.
Yeah, exactly. This is it. I can just imagine if these Victorian chaps turned up at a heavy metal gig.
sort of 1972 Hawkwind gig or something.
Yeah, exactly. Or one of them early 80s New Wobham bands, like Samson or Saxon or something like that, So yeah, Hayling, he thinks about it and he thinks that the dance that they do now is all open and above board, so it must be a sort of sanitised version of the rite, but echoing the rite. And if they still avoid the field, as the Book of Mortlake seems to think, that might be a clue to the real history of it. So he basically decides that he's going to go and check this barrow out, and which you can just the the inner voice in my head is just screaming, "Don't be a moron." You know, it's like when you watch these teen slasher movies, and it's like, let's split up. No.
Yeah, you go down into the dark cellar, and we'll go into the woods on our own.
Yeah, exactly.
And I like this sort of search now for a shovel, basically, and some bits and pieces, isn't it? There's quite a sort of detailed description of him looking for, I suppose he wants a shovel and maybe a sort of jemmy or a crowbar or something.
And he gets
like
a bicycle as well, doesn't he?
Oh, and, he pinches a bike. Yeah.
Pinches a bike, yeah. But and he goes and talks to the landlord at the Flaming Hand, and he's just like, "Would you think anybody in mind if I went and dug a hole in it?"
in your ancient monument over there, yeah.
And he's talking about going to and then he's sort of like, "Oh, okay, well, I'll go and have a look at it anyway." You know, he's probably not fooling anybody, but I love this landlord's thing here. "It ain't healthy after dark, sir. That feel ain't. Ain't no sense to go a digging and a delving in that there bank. I've lived in this here place a matter of 40 year, man and boy, and I know what I'm saying of." It's just classic.
Yes, it is. There's our "don't go dig," and delving is a good word as well.
Yeah, isn't it?
Don't go delving. Delving always implies a sort of curiosity, doesn't it? You know.
Yeah.
You're kind of searching for something, but you're not quite sure what it is.
Yeah.
Whereas digging is just, you could be digging potatoes on it.
Yeah, exactly. You're digging a drainage ditch or something. Yeah. Yeah, and he said, "Oh, he wants to go and examine it." And he's saying, "Well, isn't it healthy? Is it marshy around there?" And apparently not. And he asks if the farmers ever cultivate it. And apparently, as long as he's been alive, it's never been ploughed or anything like that. Not even in his father's or his grandfather's day.
Which I'm sure has some parallels in real life. That's something we could look into maybe. But I'm sure I've read stories. I mean, particularly in Ireland, right? With the fairy stones and that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. Well, round here, there's a lot of barrows and things around here, and they are in just wild, untamed, uncultivated places, I guess, But, there's a lovely bit here, because he says that the crops wouldn't do, sir, not in that field, which implies that there's some sort of kind of taint. So I wonder if that's where the superstition comes from, that it's, it's tainted the land, or there's some kind of evil hanging over it, and all your crops would wither and all that. Yeah. Which that's a big old trope in horror, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Oh, almost like the ancient burial ground and all that kind of. Which I guess it is if it's a barrow, right? There's going to be someone or something, which I guess we can speculate on at the end.
Yeah. And he says that, he says, "Well, I want to go and examine the mound. Who's the owner? I'd better ask his permission." And he goes, "I'm the owner, and I'm not having it."
Yeah, that was quite interesting. I quite like that, because normally you think it's going to be the people at the manor house, isn't it, and that kind of thing, the local squire or local gentry.
The squire. Yeah.
But it's the innkeeper. Yeah, and you wonder how it came into his possession.
Yeah, and you got another lovely line from this innkeeper. I love this innkeeper guy. He reminds me of all these innkeepers in all them old movies. He's great. "I won't have anyone, not the king himself, nor yet the king's son, a digging in that bank. Not for a wagon load of gold, I won't."
There you go.
So Haling's like, "Oh, fine, yeah, okay, whatever you say, no worries." And this is very. He decides he's going to anyway. So, and he get his search for a shovel. He decided that he'd spend part of the afternoon examining the outside of the mound, and then he'd go back
at night.
In the coven of darkness.
What could possibly go wrong? And this is where we then get this other interesting bit as well. He's at the inn, and he's got his eye on some tools, and he finds that the innkeeper has locked his shed up, so he can't get in there. It's almost like the innkeeper suspects him of sort of lurking around, isn't it?
Yeah, well, there was a bit like when he worked out that there was a look in the innkeeper's eye, which basically was, the "I know what you're up to" look,
Yeah, which makes you wonder if this has happened before, There's an interesting speculation. And then you think, at this point, I was wondering Is this the trap?
Indeed.
You know, oh, don't go up there. Oh, no, you don't want to go up there. Go up there, go up there.
Yeah. It's the big red button trap, isn't it? Don't press that.
Don't press, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was thinking as well, especially in a bit, because you almost get the impression he's being herded.
Yes, yeah. Which, again, is very much that trope now, Wicker Man and everything else.
Of course.
Everyone else knows what's going on except for you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And you're being, like, say, herded towards this conclusion.
Yeah. Well, as he's sitting there, he's waiting for the dark, and he goes to the bedroom and looks out at the yard and to make sure his pick and his spade were still in the open cart shed. Some random figures start appearing.
Yes, this was quite creepy, I thought.
Yeah, I thought so. You got a man slipped out from the door of the inn kitchen, slipped across the yard into the lane that lay behind the inn. And another followed him, and then a little later another. All three had black faces. He's not any allusions to race. Again, it's that
it's the soot, isn't it?
Soot.
It describes it.
Yeah, which is, again, it goes back to that Morris, which is very traditional in the Cotswolds.
Yeah.
So they're all indistinguishable.
It's very furtive, isn't it, and very secretive. And again, you wonder whose benefit this is for, because if you think, is the whole village in on this? Why is it so furtive? Is it just a little group within the village, perhaps? Or again, is it for Haling's benefit? Yeah.
For his benefit. Indeed. Well, that's kind of how I was looking at it, because you had the thing earlier, the mention that when they were doing, which it was almost like a dummy run, of the rite in the square, it's almost like a dress rehearsal, wasn't it? And everybody was involved.
Yeah. So everyone knows about that. Does everyone know about the real ritual, perhaps?
Indeed, yeah. So anyway, he basically tells himself that after a while of sort of wondering what's going on and what they're up to and all this, he basically says, it's Halloween, they're just up to some larks kind of thing, you know. And but he's getting more irritated because he really wants to get out into the barrow, doesn't he? He's still got a shovel on his mind. Yeah, exactly.
But this is that again, warning to the curious. It seems to almost becoming a bit of an obsession.
Yeah, that monomania that kicks in with these searches after the unknown. You know,
you couldn't let it lie.
No, indeed. Yeah.
I like the phrase we get here as well when he slips out of the hunter's moon. I mean, we're used to gibbous moons.
Yes.
But a hunter's moon is a very specific thing. And, you know, when you live out in the sticks, as we do here, that the slowly rising hunter's moon that really struck me, because we get it here. You get a huge bright moon slowly comes over the horizon. And it's like 3 or 4 times the size of what it normally appears to be. And it's almost like daylight out, you know, it's so bright. Sometimes tinged red. Yeah,
you got this lovely scenes now, because he slips out, but he was going to nick the bike out of the shed, but the shed's locked, like you mentioned. So he's going to walk, and it's going to take him 25 minutes to walk up there. And you get this lovely bit of him walking under this moon, and you get the lines of the hills and all that. It's very visual, isn't it?
Yeah.
But when he gets there, because he'd gone up earlier in the day just to have a look, but nothing really happened. He just sort of looked at it. Yeah, okay, it's a mound. And he thought he'd shut the gate. He was convinced he'd shut the gate.
Yes.
But the gate is now open. So you get that little bit of unease sneaking in. But again, this is a proper chap. He's not going to let a little bit of doubt put him off his, you know.
What, after all, is a load of old rot.
Yeah, exactly. This is it, isn't it? And so he goes into the field and he goes round, and you've got this. It's almost like it's got a perimeter fence made of shrubbery.
Yeah, sort of brambles and thickets, isn't it?
Yeah.
All around. It's quite dense from the sound of it, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. He looks for a thin spot in its defence of thorn and hazel bushes. And hazel bushes. Oh,
hazel but there's also a cult reference there, right? With your hazel wands and everything else. Yeah,
of course. Yeah.
And this is where he hears the fox, in inverted commas, in the bushes, right? Because it must be a fox.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, something heavy and bulky breaking the smaller branches of the undergrowth. I love that furtive movement in the undergrowth.
That's always effective, isn't it?
Because we go walking a lot, and when you're in the woods at night and you get that furtive movement, and you know it's a fox or a weasel or something like that, but the first thing that comes into your mind isn't a fox or a weasel, is it?
It's an unnameable thing.
It's an eldritch abomination.
Just a shambling horror.
Yeah. Shambling horror.
Foxes don't make that kind of sound, though, do they? He's talking about twigs breaking and that. You'd hear a sort of snuffling with a fox and rustling, but this sounds like almost more like a deer or something like that sort of size.
Yeah, or a muntjac or something. Yeah. But you get this a lovely thing here, because this must be a fox, I suppose, he thought. But he must be a monster. Sounds more like a cow. But I suppose it can't be.
Yeah, that's a big fox.
Exactly. I wouldn't want to meet that on a dark night. Fox the side of a bull.
Yeah, I've seen some big badgers around here, but nothing that size. And I like this as well, because as he starts getting used to this, or he's convincing himself this is just a fox or whatever it is, then the piping starts, then the fluting starts, and now we're firmly in ritual territory, right? Yeah,
this is it. And he recognised the piping. It was the plaintive melody of Randall's round. So he paused, listening, and feet pattering unevenly up the road. There was some village game afoot then. That was a great line. Yeah, so he basically thinks to himself, from Mortlake's book, he thinks, okay, they do actually still do this all right. So I'll tell you what, I'll hide in this bush, hide out the way, and watch what's going on.
I suppose you would. That's kind of that's quite a natural thing, I think. It's like not really supposed to be there.
Yeah, something tells him that he needs to hide.
Yeah, but then you have all these things of, like, the gate was opened. Who opened the gate?
Exactly.
Is someone already been up there and kind of prepared the ground? Is there some ritual in their approach? They don't want to stop to have to open the gate. The whole thing, the whole procession from the village is all part of the ritual, perhaps, this dance.
But you also get that, I mean, how I sort of saw it as well was the fact that it was the gate had been opened, and all the rest of it prepared, but it was like they'd all gone out and gathered and waited for him to go first.
Yeah, there's that implication as well, isn't there? Again, isn't there? That's the herding, right? It's the gate is open on the pen.
Yeah.
And now he's in, now it gets shut behind him.
Yeah. And now he can't get out, because he's basically got a load of thorn bushes one way.
And a mound in front of him with...
a mound in front of him and a bunch of loonies wearing bull's heads.
Yes, a load of dancing men. And I like the way this is set up, the way the dance is described, and the way the rustling and movement in the bushes starts to increase in response to the... Well, it's a calling, isn't it? It's a summoning.
Yeah. And that is where you get the real sort of Lovecraftian vibes, and again, Machen vibes of as the piping increases, the bushes are going, and there's something coming. Something's coming.
Yes.
And he's stuck there, and there's nowhere to go. Yeah, slowly the dancers formed a ring, their faces turned away from the mound. So they're doing that thing again, that death circle. They're looking away from the mound. From outside the circle came a shrouded figure led by a man wearing a mask like a bull's head. So again, it's this figure in white, which is obviously the sacrifice.
I kind of wasn't too sure at this stage, to be honest, if he was a sacrifice, but then this figure turned up and I thought, is this a sacrifice? Indeed. Or is it the bull representing the creature and this is the priest kind of thing?
Yeah.
And I thought one other interest in here was the dancers are described as, when they look out, they're terrified.
Yes.
They're not, they must be willing participants in a sense, or are they?
Yeah.
But this isn't like... The Devil Rides Out, where we're summoning our master and we're all going to have a big party and orgy,
Yeah. No, this is almost like it's done to keep something happy. I mean, there's that implication that if they didn't do this right, maybe this bull monstery beastie thing would come and
it'd be on a rampage.
We go on a rampage, snatch them out the beds and all that kind of business,
Yeah.
And then we get the crescendo now. Again, shattering the quiet came a snapping, crashing noise from the inmost recesses of the bushes about the barrow. There was some big animal in there, and it was now crashing its way out.
And this was quite Lovecraftian in a sense, because we get no idea of what this thing is. It's not like a minotaur, but well, it could be, but it's just described as bulky, horrible, primitive. I thought primitive was a very telling word. Again, it's primal. It's not perhaps quite fully formed, or
indeed,
there's something not quite natural about it.
And he's freaking out by this point, and he gets down and he's got his hands over his ears. You just get this. He doesn't see what happens. He hears it, which is almost more disturbing.
It is, yeah.
Sounds came through the muffling hands over his ears, a crunching, tearing sound, and then a horrible noise like an animal lapping. I mean, you own dogs. You must understand that noise. You know?
It's quite an amazing sound, yeah. And
then it gets worse. I swear, it sounded like bones cracking.
That's because it was
snapping noise.
It sounded like bones cracking because it was.
And then basically the bushes go again, and the beast is gone.
Yeah.
And the horrible rite is over. So we get to the end now, and basically Halen gets to his feet, his knees trembling. He's in a terrible state now. His nerves getting the better of him. His sickness and all the kind of rest of it. And his fascinated eyes saw the break in the hazels and thorns. Then they fell upon a dark mark on the ground, dark and wet, soaking into the dry grass. A white rag, dappled with dark stains, lay near. So
that was the shrouded figure.
Indeed.
So that was the sacrifice, and the dancers have all left by this time, right?
Yep.
It's like as soon as the beast leaves, they go as well.
Yeah, that was it. As soon as the rite is over, it's like let's get out of here, lads. They'll all be down the pub now on the whiskies,
It is kind of odd because it's not. You think of these rituals generally as being celebratory or sort of a rite of worship.
Yeah.
And like you say, this just seems to be shit. We've got to feed this thing. It's almost like put a bit of meat on the end of the stick, and and now we're going to run off. You know? So, do you think they knew that he was there? We've got those implications we've spoken about, or was this just Scott ratcheting up the tension? You think, is he going to be the victim or not?
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting, but I like the fact that it's not explicitly said either way. But and this is what I mean by by our protagonist going full on Lovecraftian at the end. He could bear no more. He gave a strangled cry as he rushed blindly, stumbling, falling sometimes out of the fields and down the road.
Yeah, and that's it. It's just left with him running off into the night, presumably never the same again. Because he saw it, right?
Yeah.
He saw this thing.
Yeah. And that's it, Randall's Round. I think it's a really neat little story. I mean, it's not very long, but there's a lot of atmosphere in there. It's really dense with atmosphere. And that's what I think I think that's one of the most important things, especially with folk horror, that you get the atmosphere of the place, and that's always more important than the narrative, isn't it, in folk horror?
Absolutely. And also that feeling of the rural idyll. But then there's this little part of it that is usually old. It's usually a time thing. It's usually ancient, isn't it? That has been there for generations and generations, and people have just come to accept the fact that this is what we have to do. But again, this is like the good, typical Weird Tale stuff. We've got all those elements of a sort of ending that, you think, you could have ended that any number of ways, or you could have added more in. Did he go back to Oxford and tell people? That there's all those questions. I wanted to know how often this goes on as well.
Yeah.
Is this every year? Is it every 10 years?
Yeah.
And also the creature doesn't come from the barrow, which I was a little bit surprised.
Yeah.
You're almost expecting like one of Tolkien's Barrow Wights or something like that.
Well, when I first read it, I was expecting a white.
Yeah, the long arm comes out to grab or something.
Up here on Cock Roost Hill, which always makes me giggle.
Of course it does.
But you've got a barrow up here, which is supposed to be the Sussex White. And the other sort of thing we get, which is quite typical of the Weird Tale, there's no descriptions of anyone. Yeah.
Did you notice that as well? We don't know what these people look like. Yeah, in my mind, I've got quite a clear picture of each of the characters. That's interesting.
Indeed, yeah. Especially Mortlake and Haley.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. It was like I watched the BBC Ghost Stories for Christmas adaptation of The Treasure of Abbot Thomas. Yesterday. I thought I'd kick off Halloween Day with a classic, you know, and it's like the one of the main characters in that. That's how I'm picturing Haley, you know, with the slightly wild hair, but the tweed and the pipe, and he's doing that thing on it, you know, as he's thinking in the library, you know, big plume of smoke above his head, you know.
But then also, as much as we've got that, you could set this today, and it would still be the same story, and I think that's an element. Well, partly an element of the Weird Tale, but certainly with the folk horror, they're timeless in that sense. This could be in medieval times.
Yes,
the thing is still old, even 500 years ago. This is still old. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the great thing about it. I mean, yeah, if you wanted to rewrite that in the present day, you wouldn't actually have to do anything to it. You know, just maybe mention that he didn't have a mobile phone signal.
Oh, and he drops that in his panic.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, there you go.
That falls into the bushes and is scrabbling around for it, and that's when the thing appears, you know?
Yeah. That's the thing with modern writing contemporary stories, isn't it? The first thing you got to do is get rid of the bloody mobile phone.
I'll go up to about 1995, I think.
I tend to stick with my stuff right there. A lot of mine's set in the late 80s, early 90s.
Well, my next one's going to be Dark Ages Britain, so there's no worries about that.
Oh, yeah, good there, then. Yeah.
Maybe a sundial, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm writing one. I wanted to do one set around, I had this idea about something around a leisure centre. You know, sort of like the British Empire meets cosmic horror. You know, I'm like for my ridiculous mashups, but I was just like, I'll set it in the 90s.
Yes,
set it in the early 90s. There we go.
So there we are, Randall's Round. I'll say I was really pleased that we covered this, because this was not an author I was familiar with, and also just looking again through the Thrill of Horror, that Hugh Lamb collection.
Yeah.
There's I'm going to be browsing all the other stories. There's one or two names. I mean, M.R. James is in there, obviously.
Yeah, I think Benson's in there as well, isn't he? And
yeah. So there's some other stuff we can look at. Well, as always, we've got no shortage of stories or films.
No, well, this is it, and it was when we were thinking of one. I just for some reason my brain just thought Randall's Round would be a good one to cover. But we could have covered any of her stuff from that collection, from the Randall's Round collection. I mean, the 12 Apostles is another story, and it's very M.R. Jamesy, but it's got a more Lovecraftian horror in it. The 12 Apostles, because it is similar to Treasure of Abbot Thomas in terms it's like paintings and working out secret meanings, and because it's all on like the wainscoting of this study, but you've got it's almost Shoggothy. Yeah,
I suppose. Well, she would have been contemporaneous with Lovecraft. If we're talking 20s.
Yes,
I can't imagine she would have had any particular knowledge of him. If he was being printed in Weird Tales, I don't think that wasn't really a thing in the UK, was it?
No, it wasn't.
So, no. But the Mackin influence, I guess.
The Mackin influence, and Benson, because Benson did a lot of stuff about big slugs and caterpillars and creepy crawlies. He did a lot of stuff about like creepy crawlies, invertebrates, and I guess Hodgson as well. Because a lot of Hodgson's was about slimy things, wasn't it?
and pigs. He definitely
did have a swine thing.
As well.
Pigs and slimy things.
If you do like tales from this era, then I'd recommend you listen to Podcast to the Curious as well, which I'm sure we've mentioned before.
Yes.
It was a M.R. James podcast, and they covered all the James stories, and now they're working on sort of the James Circle and James Adjacent, so very much from that Edwardian era. And there's some really great stories they're covering on there as well. And again, things that you probably won't have heard of and authors that you won't be familiar with, which is always great when you do this kind of show, discovering new things, because I mean, we've both been reading weird fiction since,
since we were kids, basically.
But there's still so much unread and to discover. It's and of course newer stuff being written all the time as well.
This is why when I picked up those handheld press things, because the whole point of them were to collect lost classics. So pretty much, I think, like the only one in the women's weird collections, I think the only story in both of those that I'd read was Man, Size and Marble.
Right, Nesbit, yeah.
And it was same with the British weird. Like, I mean, there were stories about Benson in there and things like that, and James, but a lot of the other stuff I'd never even heard of. Some of the people, and they were all from these like obscure literary journals of the time, and they were all sort of contemporaneous of James and that kind of thing. But there's some gems in there.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how much of that stuff there was around at the time. Even when we're watching that documentary about Dracula last night, and you go back to the Penny Dreadfuls and Varney the Vampire and all those things.
Yeah.
There's
Springfield Jack and all that.
There's huge amounts of ghost or horror or weird literature. So we're lucky to have a very rich field to plunder.
Indeed.
For our
to delve.
To delve, yes.
To delve into.
Like a bit of delving,
A bit of a delve, yeah.
Now, we can't, of course, talk about this story without mentioning Wicker Man.
Nope.
We mentioned it a little bit at the start there. So I was wondering if this story was an influence on the Wicker Man. And all I can say is, I didn't know this. The Wicker Man was based on a book by David Pinner. It's a 1967 novel called Ritual, which originally in the book it was set in Cornwall. So that kind of ties in with our Padstow hobby horse.
Indeed.
Because at the end of the Wicker Man, in one of those big scenes at the end, there is the hobby horse.
Yes.
And the teaser appears. They're almost sort of snapping at him, I think, at one point. You get that thing. So, to my mind, there's a connection there.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that he'd been aware of this story at least when he wrote that, or I like to think so.
Yeah, well, in the introduction to this, the British Library of the Weird reprint of Randall's Round, which is a superb book, you should pick it up. In the introduction, the editor says that it's believed that The Wicker Man, Blood on Satan's Claw, and Midsummer being the most recent, that was 2019, were kind of inspired by this.
Inspired by that, yeah. I've not seen Midsummer yet.
I haven't.
I've just seen the other two.
Yeah, it's believed that they obviously, the people who knew of this story, and I guess it's not just that. Obviously, you've got like the tradition of the hobby horse and all that, and Mackin as well.
Yeah.
You know.
But this does seem to set the tone for a guy comes to the village, doesn't believe in what's happening, etc., doesn't it? And the interesting thing with that novel, The Ritual, The Wicker Man, was we almost didn't get it, because apparently David Pinner was off to see his agent one day, and he put the only manuscript he had of the novel on the roof of the car. Like you do sometimes, don't you? You get to the car and you think, I've done it with music here before. I think, oh, gee, I've forgotten my leads. I'll put that on there and I'll go back in again. Well, he got in and he was going to drive off with the manuscript on the roof.
Oh, God.
And it was only the fact that another driver said, oh, you got something on your roof. Otherwise, the pages of that novel would have been strewn across London or wherever it was.
Yeah. Oh, it'd been a disaster, wouldn't it?
Can you imagine? I mean, we've all lost files online, I suppose, or had thing. I've
God.
got an external hard drive that's just crashed at the moment, and
Yeah, same things. I had one a while ago, and I'd written a novella, and I'd done something like 4,000 or 5,000 words, and it hadn't bloody saved, and my computer died. So that was an entire day's work just gone.
and however much you remember, it's so difficult to get back. Yeah. Though, who was it? I think it was Robert E. Howard who had a similar thing. I think he sent a manuscript and it got lost.
Yeah.
And he just sat down and just went bang and just wrote the whole thing out again in one go, sort of thing. But that's Robert E. Howard.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas I spent 2 days swearing, hurling abuse at my laptop.
Technology, it's a curse and a gift.
Indeed,
at the same time.
indeed,
A
double-edged
blessing
sword.
Yeah, blessing and a curse. So so David Pinner. Anyway, luckily the ritual got to his agent and was published in '67, and in 1971 he sold the rights of the book to Christopher Lee.
Amazing.
And that's how the Wicker Man come about. Yeah, you wouldn't have thought, would you? Christopher Lee. Well, I suppose he was a man who had an interest in the occult.
Yeah.
And by all accounts, had quite a comprehensive library on collection.
He was very hands-on with a lot of the stuff he did as well, wasn't he, by all accounts? So
yeah. And I think the original novel's quite hard to get hold of now. I think there was a sort of re-release or a new press version in, I think, about 2010. And in 2014, Pinner wrote a sequel to it called The Wicker Woman. That's Wicca. So a nice little pun. You've got the Wicker Man and the Wicker Woman. So I'm going to check that out at some time. I'll see if I can find the original and then that sequel as well.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to look at.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to track them down. I've not read either of those. It'll be really interesting to see.
I didn't know it was from a book, to be honest.
I didn't. I just thought it was an original screenplay.
Yeah. Okay, well, we hope you've enjoyed our story for today. If you do have any observations or corrections, I think we've been all right in the pronunciation this time. It's the Clark Ashton Smith stories we struggle with.
Oh, God, yeah. Oh, that last one was a bit of a nightmare, wasn't it?
Yes, Manichaean and...
We've got some corkers coming up, yes. I know we have.
Yes. And do let us know if you're a regular at the Flaming Hand Inn. I'd love to hear about that. Or if you're a regular at a pub with an unusual name, then do let us know as well.
Oh yeah, do a Dagon's. You could send them into Dagon's sack. Send us your ridiculous pub names.
Yes. Yeah. Now, speaking of which, you speak his name, you walk widdershins round the library, and he doth appear.
Yeah, I'll whip it out from under the table.
Here it is. Oh my God.
Here we go.
Oh my word. Stand back. Right. Do you want to delve, sir?
Oh, I'll have a delve. Here we go. Looks like we... Look at this. He's got spam again.
Oh, spam. Yes. Now, one reason Dagon's sack is so bulbous... Bulbous? Is that a word? It is now.
Bulbous, I think you mean.
Bulbous and bulbous. It combines the two.
I like it.
Bulbous, yeah. It hasn't been emptied for a little while. But we also have a lot of spam in here. Dagon gets spam. Would you believe it? So I'm just going to read through a couple of these quickly. Yulia says... And I'm just reading these as they're coming out, literally. I want to finest small talk. Okay?
Small talk with Dagon.
I'm not sure I'm not sure Dagon does a lot of small talk, does he really?
I can't imagine, no.
I wonder what the small talk... With him and Hydra, if they're lounging around, just says, it's... What do they can't talk about the weather, can they?
No.
Did you see that whale today? God. Well, I don't know.
That's the penguin, love. Yeah.
Did you remember to pick up a penguin?
Yeah, exactly.
That's one for our UK listeners of a certain age.
Yeah. Pick up a penguin.
Yeah. Then we have Jean or Jean, I'm not quite sure, who tells us they are a gas engineer working for an oil exploration company.
Oh.
So, we're possibly in underwater sort of territory there. I want to travel to your country for a vacation. Do you have an apartment for rent? I will pay if you assist me. Well, There's always room in Innsmouth for strangers. Visitors are always welcome.
Plenty of room at the Gilman House.
Yes. Never mind the flaming hand in. There's always room at the Gilman. Room 428. Ask for room 428.
Yeah.
And our last one is from, I like this name, Lazaro. Lazaro.
That's
good, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's almost sounds like a Smithian name, perhaps, or some sort of swashbuckler.
Yeah. So I was going to say, swashbuckling hero.
Yeah.
You're going to with a rapier.
Yes.
And a feather in his hat. Yeah.
The Comte de Lazaro or something.
Comte de Lazaro, yeah.
And he or she says, because, we don't know, I sent you this message because I would like to tell you something. And that's it.
That's it?
Yeah, that's got my curiosity piqued, that one.
All right. Secrets for Dagon.
Yes. Yeah. I'm going to go delving on that one. What is this? I want to tell you something. I want to tell you something. I don't know. Anyway, we shall pass those on to his magnificence in his watery realm. And we rarely get an answer back, but,
Yeah. Who knows what he gets up to on his nights off.
Then again, we wouldn't really want an answer back, would we, to be honest?
Not really, no. What happens in Innsmouth stays in Innsmouth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we shall say no more.
Indeed.
Right, well, it seems like the storm has abated a bit outside, and I see our bus has just turned up, so it's time to vacate Innsmouth. As we say, Halloween goes on for another week or so at least. Because that's the way we're both inclined.
Indeed. Yeah.
That's one of our inclinations.
Yeah.
So we did a live Halloween broadcast a couple of days back. That's up on YouTube now. If you didn't catch it live, you can see it on YouTube. Jeff Goad popped in from the States and we had a good chat about all things Halloween. We've got Tim's Halloween reading up already of the Ambrose Bierce stories. And as we go out with this episode, there'll be one up, or it'll be shortly up. I'll be doing a reading for our patrons only of my short story, The Scarecrow, which is set out in the Fens.
Yep, so that's about it for this time. But next time, join us. We'll be interviewing Mythos author Matthew Davenport. I'm looking forward to that because I've read quite a lot of his stuff these days. So he's been in a bunch of themed anthologies with people like David Hambling and C.T. Phipps.
Oh, excellent! Right.
Yeah, he's been in like the Tales of Yog-Sothoth and the Book of Yig, the Revelations of the Serpent, and the Al-Azif, and things like that. So yeah, that should be interesting.
Nice. Yeah. So we're looking forward to getting Matthew into the Gilman house and interrogating him about his work. We don't interrogate; it's all very friendly. So with that, I'd just like to thank all our listeners and supporters, and particularly our patrons. If you'd like to join them and help support the show, check out our Patreon site. You can join at 3 tiers of membership. Everyone gets a free copy of Innsmouth News every month, and of course you get access to the bonus content, not only for the Innsmouth Book Club, but also for Strange Shadows as well. So, thanks again for joining us, folks. We'll see you next time. It's goodbye from me, Rob Whiten.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.